Hey, what's going on, everybody? David Noy with SpeakEasy HR, presented by Payroll Partners. I am back at it, live episode 45. It is middle of September, and I've been looking forward to this episode for quite some time as I got to get connected with my guest today. He's a monster of a guest. He founded a fun company called Monster.com, and he's got a new one coming out called Boomband. Jeff Taylor, welcome to SpeakEasy HR. How are you today?
Hey, David, how you doing?
Doing pretty well.
What's fun is this the planning. Like we talked 4 months ago, we talk about doing a little pre-spot, and then another 3 weeks passes, and here we are. And in the meantime, you're in my LinkedIn. We're developing a friendship. It's been really, really cool.
Yeah. No, it's been awesome. And this is what this is all about. So coming in, hanging out, having fun on a Monday, live on LinkedIn and YouTube. So again, for those of you who have never watched Speakeasy HR, I started this last year as just a project idea in my head that I live in the country of bourbon. I live in Kentucky. I enjoy bourbon. I enjoy vintage bourbon. I enjoy HR and business. So why not just blend it all together and make a podcast and talk about a variety of topics that everyone can learn from, especially somebody that's had one of the most successful job boards in the history of job boards, back to when the internet really wasn't even a thing. So I want to get into that a little bit. People that don't know you much, Jeff, other than obviously monster.com is what you're probably mostly well known for. But the chat section is open. So if you have a question, chime in, engage with us. We like that engagement. We're going to be playing the envelope icebreaker game coming up. So, Jeff, if you just want to tell a little background about your upbringing in the Midwest. Now you're out east, and you were in Chicago for a while. You've been a club DJ, and you've just had some really interesting situations and experiences, as we were talking before you came on. So, having the world record water skiing on a blimp, and the snow maze at the Olympics in 2002, right? So.
Yeah.
Just tell everybody a little bit about yourself that haven't really heard you on a podcast before. Where do you start?
I don't know. I'm a preacher's kid. My dad was a minister, couldn't
Yeah.
keep a church. He was too liberal, ended up being a professor. So we moved around from church to church. Ultimately, he went to Rutgers and then got a job at
Yeah.
UMass Boston. And that's what brought me east. I am probably not a great student. I'm ADHD and probably dyslexic in a very minor way. I had a hard time reading when I first started. Sounds terrible, but the thing is that what it did for me was it gave me that extra push to learn how to comprehend and how to read in a way that I don't read fast, but I read deeply. And that's probably been a game changer for me as I've gone on to my version of I'm a inch wide and miles deep with the things that I care about. And that, however my brain is wired, has been perfectly aligned to learning everything about a subject. And, if you look at the career space, the talent space, this has been one of my loves really for my whole career. Started as a recruiter, and I placed technical equivalent of developers today, programmer analysts. And then I worked in an ad agency that specialized in human resource communications. And then I owned my own agency. And then through clients' feedback that the newspaper wasn't working, then actually founded this little idea, which was called the Monster Board, which then was a game-changing event. And so I'm kind of fast forwarding through some of my early struggle, which defined me, and then ultimately probably created the Jeff Taylor that's kind of still rattling around, coming up with ideas.
Yeah. And you had your resume on the internet, the first resume on the internet, correct?
First resume, right? Yeah.
First
So
resume.
when I started the process, I was placing help wanted ads in about 300, maybe even more newspapers, mostly in New England, but reached into New York and New Jersey, Philadelphia. So I was East Coast, and I had an opportunity I had a very big client that was called Wellfleet Communications that basically said, I'm going to leave your agency unless you can help me figure out how to solve this problem. And I'd been placing full page ads in the Boston Globe for this customer. And my dad was at UMass Boston. He and I had email addresses very early, like in 1992. And I had a UMass email address so we could talk over email. And I started reading about bulletin board systems. And that was the initiation of something. Engineers were on these bulletin board systems. There was no web at that point. And I decided I was going to build one. And the idea for the monster board, it was a big idea, a monster idea. And how did I apply that to a bulletin board? And it came out the monster board. And that was our first name. This is a well-known story, but went to a coffee shop very early in the morning after having a dream and drew out the interface, which I have, which is been the basis for our 2 patents, and also has protected other well-known companies that have buyer-seller marketplaces with the prior art that I created. And so this was the very beginning, only 175 or 180 websites when we started. And by the time I knew I had to register Monster, we registered the web address monster.com, and we were the 454th.com. So the very, very beginning, we titled this working together and, kind of crossing the monster chasm, based on a book by Jeffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm.
Yeah.
And I always like this idea of the innovator, and this idea of how do you work from the early adopters to the massive middle to the laggards. And that book for me early on changed my thinking about the way we positioned, the way we marketed. And I just picked it back up, and it's still relevant. I just kind of skimmed through it, and some of the anchor points I still believe today are things that really are game changers for a startup. So I'd recommend it, even though it's a 25-year-old book. So,
Jeffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm. So if anybody's
yeah.
looking for a new book, there you go, from Jeff.
So I put the first resume and the first job posting on the World Wide Web. There was a counterpart. It was called Online Career Center. Also had a similar threaded conversation, threaded discussion that was happening in the Midwest. And we got together, and ultimately the monster.com story formed in late 1998, before we went on the Super Bowl in 1999, where we merged the Monster Board and Online Career Center and actually created monster.com formally. And so that's the original history.
Very cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. I'm sure you've said that a few times in your years, and being on LinkedIn, more active on LinkedIn, which you were actually in the process of buying LinkedIn back in the day. So that didn't go through, and maybe that was a blessing or not, but what got you to that situation where you were about to buy LinkedIn back then?
I would say that's probably overstating it. I was watching, we had created Monster Networking. Monster Networking structurally was going to be a third leg of the stool. I had jobs, I had resumes, and I wanted that third product. I had struggled to, if you look, jobs was 65% of our revenue. Resumes was about 30% of the revenue, and all the other products were between 5 and 8%, no matter what we did. And when I realized Monster Networking wasn't really getting traction, I was watching the beginnings of this company called LinkedIn, and it was Reed, and so I flew out and met with Reed, and we agreed. It's basically a back of the envelope concept. We talked about a number. I took it back. I went in front of my board and suggested that we purchase this company. We've been buying companies. We probably bought 60 other job boards across the world. And many of these companies had copied Monster. And so it was very exciting to go into a market, go into Germany or go into London or go into any number of different places in Asia, and to purchase companies that that really complemented Monster very well. And so LinkedIn was a natural, just kind of next acquisition. They were losing more money than most of the companies that we were looking at. And so it would have been a dilutive deal, even buying it with Monster stock and cash. And my board turned it down. And so that actually changed the trajectory, kind of like you say, because after that weekend, I gave my notice at Monster, deciding that the board knew more about running Monster than I did. And so it was time for them to show their stuff. And I was going to move on and do some other things. And so I left in 2005 and went off and started a company that was called Eons. Got my butt kicked by Facebook, which was I built a social network for baby boomers, 50 plus. And what was crazy is Facebook was going from colleges to high school. I thought that positioning was really good. And then as it turned out, the high schoolers taught their parents how to use Facebook. And it took me maybe 3, 4, 5 months to realize that it was costing us more to get our users than we could make on them. And so the reality was I got a very good learning experience from that. And then kind of to maybe finish the arc of my career to date, I got recruited by a company called Bridgewater and to go work on, for a company that Ray Dalio formed, which was down in Westport, Connecticut. And I went down and met with their group, and I was kind of on garden leave from selling Eons. And I didn't do very well with Ray, but I did well with the rest of his team. I got offered what they called a try-by, which was an executive position, but it was maybe a 6-month trial. And I sold my house and I moved to Fairfield with the idea that I was going to work for Ray and see if I could learn some things from Ray. And I guess maybe 3 weeks into that stint, after I got through boot camp, I talked to Ray, and Ray said, "You sold your house," and I said, "Yep, I moved here." And he said, "You won't last 6 months." And I said, "I'll work for you for 10 years," and that's exactly what I did. 9 years and 11 months and 13 days.
Wow. Whew, man, that's impressive. I mean, I'm sure there's been some struggles and some marketing blips and challenges and just things that you've learned beyond running a business, right? That we'll get into. I want to shift gears a little bit. As I said before, you don't know these questions in here, Jeff. These are 15 questions, icebreaker questions. So I'll give you just a couple seconds to think about a number 1 through 15. I'm going to play this real quick, see if it'll go. Okay,
how about 10?
10. Give me 10. All right. Jeff's got number 10. What do we got? This is if you're in charge of renaming HR, what's the funniest yet oddly accurate title you'd give it?
I mean, today I'd call it talent upside down.
Upside down. There you go.
Because we're in this crazy process right now where it's sort of like a new age of enlightenment for talent. I think everything is going to change. I think the sight lines are changing. I think the kind of ground under your feet is changing. And to some extent, every HR person is also a seeker. In the Boomband terms, which we'll talk about in a minute, I call them players. And so I start thinking about the whole world is basically, I think it's going to shift. There's a lot of drama around will it or won't it, but I think in the same way that you saw with the internet, there was a lot of trepidation at the beginning of the process. It was sort of like the perfect storm when the internet formed. We can talk about some of the specifics, but those same kind of storm-like characteristics are here now. And I think the reason why I would say turn it upside down or inside out, or maybe it's both, is because we're going to have to look at things differently. And
Yeah.
I see the pressure that AI is creating. And the first pressure is it's just like a chaotic scramble. And the reality is, once that starts to level out, you're going to see that jobs are going to be different. I think our career trajectory as we know it today is going to change. The idea of learning how to learn again, which is very exciting,
Yeah.
but some people grok it and some people don't want to. And so I would say HR is going to be in a conundrum because HR has classically tended, I'm going to be kind of generalize a little bit, to be a little bit slower, sort of like back in the day, you would say choose IBM because there's going to be very little risk in choosing IBM, right?
Right.
And now I would say you cannot stay on that type of a course. You're going to need to reinvent yourself, reinvent the department that you work in, reinvent the teams that you work around. And I think it's exciting, and that's where my name would be.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. We're going to shift gears and get into your topic. So, just a couple of words from our presenting sponsor, Payroll Partners. So if you want to grab a drink, take a quick break. We got 57 seconds, and then we're going to get into your topic, Jeff, crossing the monster chasm, and going to pick your brain a little more. We're live on LinkedIn and YouTube. So if you are watching live, we do have an audience that I know is watching. So if you have a question for Jeff, throw it in the comments. Would love to hear from you. Be back in 1 second here, or 1 minute, Jeff. Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
Finding a new employee takes time and money. For one position on a single job board, you could easily spend a minimum of $5 to $10 a day advertising a job post. It's worth noting that the average time it takes to hire a new employee is 36 days. However, it can take longer than that. You could find yourself paying hundreds of dollars a month for a single job board. And if you're using multiple job boards for multiple positions, this could add up to thousands of dollars a month. There is a much simpler and more affordable way of finding the right candidate. At Payroll Partners, we offer an applicant tracking system to help manage your hiring process. Our ATS is customizable, allowing you to decide which days you want to run the job and when to close it so you don't break the bank. And this feature lets you e-blast your network, posting jobs on multiple boards at once, all managed in one location. Payroll Partners, elevating your payroll and HR experience.
There's a lot of platforms out there, Jeff, as you've seen and developed over the years. So if you're fed up with bad service, would love to talk to you. Look us up, payrollpartners.net, and see if we can help you. So, all right, Jeff. So we talked months ago and picked a date for you to come on live, which we are here, middle of September, and you're just a bank of knowledge and marketing and things that you've learned from and what you have, learned along the ways with Monster. So I love your topic, and I love what you have done. You had mentioned some of the things that having a world record in water skiing with a blimp. So I want to start there. Like what got you to do a water skiing world record with a blimp? Where did that come from?
So one of the things when you have a profitable company that is changing the game, and I ran this company Monster with the idea that we were going to there was a better job out there. There was a life ahead of kind of where you are. And so it was important for our brand to live those values.
Mhm.
And so we would do crazy stunts. And, we built a snow maze at the Olympics. We built a crop circle outside of O'Hare Airport near Chicago. And one of the things that I had thought about as an idea was there was the Goodyear blimp, and there were maybe a couple of others, but it was like that felt like it was a really underutilized thing that was fun, and it has all those things I like. You can learn a lot about something, and so I actually found out that the Lightship Group actually leases these blimps. It's owned by Richard Branson. And we put our first, I don't know, I'm going to call it 85-foot blimp up in the sky. And we floated it along the East Coast, went to major events, to baseball games, to tennis matches. and it had a big monster on the side of it. It was great, and I loved it as a medium. It was big, not scary. It was exactly like I wanted our brand to be. And so I went back to the Lightship Group and said, look, we're trying to get our blimp across the country to events. It's expensive and it's a lot of flying. I said, look, why don't we do 2 blimps? And so the word came back from Richard Branson that there were just a few blimps that were in the fleet, but one was going to come available and that they would let us put a second monster blimp in the sky. And he said, but I have a challenge for Jeff. So I was like, okay. And he said, I want to see if he can beat my world record water skiing behind a blimp. And I was like, in the meeting, and this is a bit of what I'm like, I said, sure, I'll do it. Yeah. Why not? And I wasn't talking to Richard Branson. I was talking to the Lightship team. And so next thing you know, I was in New York City. My assistant called me and said, you're going to Panama City, Florida next Tuesday. It's like, what am I doing? And she said, you're going to go water ski behind a blimp. And I was like, oh, shit. What is happening here? And I said, by the way, what is his record? And so she went and checked, and it was 1.3 miles. And I'm not a water skier. Like I'm the kind of person that gives the thumbs up, gets pulled out of the water, maybe gets out. Like I've been around a pond 6 times in my life. And so as any good CEO would, that's interested in putting themselves out in front of their brand, which is the kind of CEO that I was, I said, sure, I'll do it. And so next thing you know, I'm in a hotel room in Panama City, Florida, and there's a wetsuit on the bed, and it says, we'll see you at 7:30 in the morning. So, I did what you would do in a hotel room. I put the wetsuit on, and I realized it didn't fit, wasn't right. And I was sort of bummed, but I was like, I don't care, whatever. So I went down next morning, and 2 of them were cracking up right away as we met downstairs. And it's like, what's wrong? It's like, I had the wetsuit on backwards. I had it zipped up the front. It's supposed to zip up the back. And I was like, okay, I didn't. And then I said, how's this actually going to work? And so the blimp was going to fly overhead, 200-foot rope with a handle on the end. I said, okay, I need some gloves. And so they got me some gloves. Next thing you know, I'm in the water in the bay in Panama City. And the blimp is flying toward me. I've got my skis on, and I'm supposed to catch this rope. And this rope goes right by me. I couldn't reach it. Comes back around. I get the rope. It's like zinging through my hand. And then all of a sudden I'm on the handle, and it pulls me up. I went about 30 seconds, and there was a big barge wake coming across. But it's like a 5-foot wake in a relatively flat area. And I just yard sailed. In front of me, there were 3 boats. There was 2 small boats and a big boat. And I was like, okay, I could see my team on one of the boats. The big boat is going to cut the wake, and the smaller boat had the scuba guy on it. And I was like, what's that guy for? And that guy is going to come and save you if you're at the bottom. And so I wipe out. I come up sputtering, and there are no people on the boats. And I'm like, what the hell? And they're crying so hard laughing that everyone is just bent over laughing. All right. So next time around, I get up, I ski 3.3 miles. And it was, I wouldn't say it was a big athletic feat, but it was so fun. And at some point, I'm like, okay, I think I heard a bullhorn, and they said, you've passed the record. And I went on and on and on, and then finally dropped down. What I didn't realize is they picked me up at the main boat. And immediately when I got up onto the boat, they were interviewing me live. And I hadn't actually thought about anything that I was going to say. You can obviously see that's not a huge problem, but I'm talking about, trying to compare some of the exciting kind of athletic moment with the idea of taking risks in your career and trying to make it so it sounds good. Richard Branson calls a phone at one of the Lightship group, talks to me, and he says, I don't know whether to be mad at you or excited. And he said, you beat my record. clearly. He said it on a Baywatch episode, which I thought was actually hilarious. And he said, but it's going to be great for the brand, especially in Europe. And it turns out that it really was, because the headlines, like a full page ad in USA Today, but the headlines around Europe, as I was expanding the Monster brand into 19 European countries, it was huge. And this was an employee moment. I had 800 employees at headquarters at that point. All 800 were in my main, what we called the Monster Den, listening. And so it has so many of the things that I love about marketing. It's an actual event. It's getting great coverage. It really kind of propelled our brand forward. And for me as a leader, it gave me a chance to show that I could take on the challenges that it took, not just to run the revenue and to make sure that the business is growing, but the overall picture of a CEO of a growing company like Monster.
Yeah. Wow. So you have one world record? Or you have more than that?
I don't even have that world record. They then went on and I don't know, one of the reality shows had blimp water skiing on as a challenge, and it was our blimp that did it, but somebody beat the record, which was fine. That is my only world record.
Okay. Oh, well, let's shift gears a little bit, because I think something that you said earlier about people rebranding themselves as they're looking for new jobs. Everybody in the market at some point is going to be looking for a new job. You rarely see someone staying at a company 5, 10 plus years. My kids are teenagers. I'm trying to tell them what to do, or not tell them what to do, but give them guidance on where to potentially have a career, and they'll have to job search. They'll have to be on job boards. They'll have to network, right? So as you are an entrepreneur, and just the way that you have ran businesses and have failed and have been successful, how would you define an entrepreneur based on everything you've learned up to this point?
Wow, I wasn't even sure where you're going with that. So I guess my definition of an entrepreneur is when everyone around you thinks you're crazy and you still think you have a good idea and you act on it.
Yeah.
And I get people all the time that's, I'm thinking about starting a business, and I would typically recommend that you go and learn everything you can about a particular topic. And a lot of times that might mean going to work for someone else, and then formulate your ideas with a groundswell of experience. You think about it. I was a recruiter. I worked in an agency that did human resource activities, like So Help Wanted, running employee referral programs, actually doing all the different marketing and branding and design things for companies to help them stand out for attracting employees. And then I had my own agency, and I learned how to build that leadership team and how to build a reputation in the marketplace. And then came up with the idea for Monster. And you think about that, the amount of experiences that I'd had in my experience bank when I went on to start this. And it was very clear that there was pain. And maybe this is a moment where we talk about crossing the chasm, right? 1993, 1994, the talent shortages were acute, and it was rising because there was a recession, 90, 91, and then companies had really started to anchor and were growing. At the same time, H-1B visas were approved. And so the idea that you actually could hire people that were from outside the country became, there was a kind of greasing of the skids to make that happen. The World Wide Web formed in 1994. The first free email was in 1994. So if you look at the combination of the unrest in the market, companies weren't happy with the recruiting solutions they had. The actual seekers weren't happy because they weren't able to get jobs because things were very regional, and the shelf life of the Help Wanted section was very short. So you basically had your resume was snail mail. You would typeset your resume and you would put it in an envelope and send it off to a company, a black hole then, right? And job postings were in the newspaper one day a week, and they were expensive. And so The entire market was both exploding with technology, unhappy clients and seekers, and it was the perfect storm for introducing Monster. The other thing was you had Alta Vista and you had Lycos and you had Yahoo and you had the beginnings of Google. And so you had this very similar to, if you look at, you have OpenAI and ChatGPT, and you have Perplexity, and you have Anthropic with Claude, and you have Grok, and you have Gemini, and you have in this same battle today. But it's all about the infrastructure. They call them transformers today. Back in the day, these were all the search engines, and this was all the infrastructure that was going to sit under the application that we built, which was Monster. And so we were one of the first applications to sit on top of that. I think one of the things about building a buyer seller marketplace is we had to track the companies and we had to track the seekers. It was not easy to do at the beginning. It's a painful process. I remember my first salesperson in tears in my office, basically talking about her experience explaining the internet to a client, and got done with like the 45 minutes. And it was just starting to talk about Monster. And the person was like, "Thank you for the meeting. I appreciate you teaching me about the internet," but no time or really interest in trying to figure out what our solution was. And never heard of it. Something crazy called Monster or the Monster Board. I don't know. Had these characters running around. It was hard work at the beginning of this process. And there's not a lot kind of written about that first struggle, but I can remember, I don't know, Adweek did an article and I had 1,000 people. I didn't know if it was 1,000 page views or 1,000 people that had visited. I just knew I had 1,000. That was the count coming off the server. And we didn't have any of the tools that we have today. There was no Google Analytics. There were no ways to really get precise like there are today. And then if you jump ahead 3 or 4 years, we had established our market share. We were on our way really to building out maybe 65 or 70% market share in this space, and then needing to press the accelerator. And it was at that point where we were starting to make the transition where Help Wanted was going from the newspaper to online, when we pressed the accelerator, did a Super Bowl commercial, grew 20x in that year. And you actually saw our footprint expand. It allowed us to launch in London and to continue that expansion into the other European countries, as I talked about. And then you started to see other competitors form. LinkedIn formed, Indeed formed, and different models started to emerge. And so that was probably the first time that Monster was really feeling the heat of the competition. At that point, the massive middle of the crossing of the chasm was kicking in full speed. And so you'd gone from the innovators to the early adopters. In that massive middle, we basically just grew from 80 million to 400 million, on our way to $1 billion and on from there. And we were hiring salespeople. I can remember doing a back of the envelope calculation with 6 salespeople, with Andy McKelvey, who was the person that I had sold Monster to, which is maybe a different story. And we decided, look, we could hire 1,000 salespeople with this calculation. And we went about and started to do that. And I don't know, 6 months later, we had added 100 salespeople. And, today, when something like that happens, it's a company that's really on the move. In 1995, 96, 97, if you're growing that quickly, I think we grew to about 2,000 salespeople. And so if you look at the impact that we were having in the marketplace, it was crazy. Now, the laggards coming on also sometimes it times out with the fact that Monster started to take its eye off the ball a little bit. It's kind of printing money. I've left at that point. The leadership position doesn't just get awarded to you because you decide. Indeed's model, which was a CPC model, and free jobs was a brilliant strategy to run against Monster. I think in other countries, Stepstone in Europe and other companies, JobsDB and others, Naukri in India started to rise, and it was clear to me that Monster was in its arc. And, that's a classic arc that finished with Monster selling to Ronstedt. I don't think that was a great move. Ronstedt is a huge staffing and talent agency. And by selling to one big player like that, the other players start to move away. That's not good for sales. And then ultimately it was 51% bought by Apollo. And then you see the kind of selling off of the assets. Monster still lives today through Bold. And I hope it has another chapter, which would be exciting. But that is the crossing the chasm of the experience that I had. And some of it I wasn't there for. But my love for this brand is very strong, has always been there.
Yeah. So everything you've seen in this industry and bringing Monster up to where it was when you left, and kind of seen what's happened since you have moved on, how have you seen the job search process change the most dramatically? And how do you see it moving forward with your new launch of Boomband? And seeing what that looks like is very exciting to me for a few reasons. But, what are some of the things that you have seen dramatically change the most?
Well, I mean, I think let's look at it from the job seeker perspective, and let's look at it from the employer HR perspective. I think when I started, Monster was a buyer seller marketplace. And so the idea was that we would grow that database of resumes, one copy always in distribution, easy to change. And the same thing for the jobs. The jobs were in one place. And that was naive on my part, because now those jobs are distributed to hundreds of both large and niche job boards. There's an entire business that formed to maintain the amount of traffic of people applying for these jobs. As more and more companies came online, the need to manage that traffic happen, and that's your applicant tracking system and your CRM and your HRIS systems is all about the intake and the ingestion of these applicants. Since I left the industry, the programmatic industry formed, which was basically taking the job signal coming from a company, job posting, and actually distributing that out, maybe in a more democratic way and a more strategic way, out to larger boards and smaller boards to try to both entice different kinds of applicants, but also to throttle that flow based on more and more people, companies that were in between the talent and the hiring managers. And I think at some point here, a couple macro events that happen in the middle of this, obviously the economic cycles and the little bit of a struggle that we're in now, the pandemic, and the kind of pent up demand that was created, where you had, for a hot minute, 20% unemployment, and then the kind of bounce out of the pandemic, where you went to 3% unemployment, and you had, millions of jobs were created in a blip around 2001, 2002, and then that has cooled to kind of pre-pandemic times, and so the market feels soft now. For the first time, maybe in many people's professional careers, you actually have a higher supply and lower demand in a way that's very uncomfortable. I think a market at 3.3% unemployment is a fully employed market. Most of that 3% is not actively in the marketplace. So if we're at 4.3% now, every 10th is 150,000 people. So you can see that you've got an impact, let's call it, 1.5 million additional people at any given time are out looking for jobs. That in its own right would be causing a lot of agita in the market. When you take and you overlay with AI and you put both the actual impact and sort of the threat of AI, has companies in evaluation mode trying to figure out whether they could actually deploy AI programs that would make it so that they could actually with an agentic layer of digital employees could actually either lay some people off or hire less people and get, let's say 10x growth. And so this marketplace has created an environment for change. I'll talk about Boomband in a second, but there's three things I really like about the AI scenario that we're in right now. The first one was last fall, everyone was saying AI is not going to take your job. Someone that knows AI is going to take your job. I think that was sort of like Q4, and I think that made everyone feel good. And then McKinsey came out with a report and said that we're going to have 30% more productivity because of AI by 2030. And that was kind of like the Q1 report, right? Or that was what people were talking about and saying that, okay, so we're going to have 30% more time to be more productive, to do human things like we do. My own view is that 30% is going to impact in two ways. One is I think we're going to lose employees. Let's call it 30% because that's a little bit dramatic. And the 70% that are left are going to have to be 10x more productive in order to match the kind of expectations for growth I think that we're going to have in an agentic future here in the short term. Now, there's one other factor there. Like we're very much in kind of a skill-based movement right now, where there's an awful lot of focus on people's skills. I think the idea that you don't necessarily need a college education, and you're seeing job postings now, I don't know, 60% plus are now starting to drop the college education as one of the requirements for a job posting. I think the reality in hiring is much, much lower than that there's still a reflection that a college degree is part of that rite of passage. But I think that will continue to soften. And the second thing I'm seeing, if you look at the years of experience that you have, I think you could have 10 years of experience 1 year 10 times, or you could have 10 years of cumulative experience, or you could be a coordinator carrying, I don't know, Python bags for other full stack developers. I'm really just funning here, but the idea is you might have Python on your resume and it not be actual Python coding, but yet the keyword applicant tracking poll is actually identifying that keyword. And so what we're seeing is we lack some sophistication, so some of those people are getting through. I think that we're going to move forward to what I would call kind of AI shapers. And what you'll have with AI shapers is people that have more generalist skills. They're good problem solvers. They're good critical thinkers. They're creative. They're open-minded. They've got the right mission and also philosophically understand where the company's going. You put that kind of person in place to help you manage the humans in the system with the digital agents in the system. That, I think, is going to be sort of like the next wave, whereas right now it's a mad scramble for skills.
Yeah.
My new company, I'm going to build an agentic platform for this new generation of seekers, I call them players, to market themselves. And so I'm focused on the player side of the market, not the HR stack. And my focus is on building out a dossier, a much richer document that celebrates a typical resume is 85% track record and 15% current. And I see a document and a kind of live experience that's 80% current, 15% forward thinking, and 5% historical. with a lot more focus on your whole self, your passions, your interests, your desires, your drive, built out descriptions of both your hard skills and soft skills, along with the stories that make you who you are. Packaging that in a way so that you can market to meet other people in new ways, to identify your coaches and mentors, and ultimately identify companies that are really interested in learning about you. In order to bring that to life, I'm going to build a gallery, and we call it an arena, a place where you can put yourself in the center. And my goal, just like Monster when we started, was to put the seekers in the center. Companies will pay most of the freight because the idea is that companies need this talent to grow. But I'm really going to focus on, is it full time? Is it fractional? Is it gig? Is it part time? Are these talent teams that are put together, whether it's for labeling for some of the big transformers, or whether it's to come in and fully do a project, or just to add people where you're light people? This kind of flex, I think, is where the marketplace is going. I read one of the books on the future of work, and it said by 2026 that close to 70% of people will be in jobs that are non-traditional FTEs.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I think this idea of embracing your side hustles and your gigs, getting those as part of your experience, is very important. Just one other point here on this dossier. I don't really understand the concept of a career break. Whether you're a stay-at-home mom or dad, or whether you are taking care of your sick mom for a year, or dad, the idea that you're on career break, why wouldn't you be head of caregiving or CEO of household? Why can't I assign a set of attributes to that make it so that you can pound your chest about the importance of the learning that you've had in these moments, as opposed to feeling like you've been out on the sideline and you're just ready to get back in the game, but you don't really know where to plug yourself in. And I think this mindset is going to shift as we become more focused on our abilities, and we're going to have to find the balance of our strengths, our values, abilities, and skills, and how do we align with the AI agentic future that's coming our way.
I got to give you a quick mini air horn for that, Jeff. This is my new little toy. So
Very nice.
anytime I find a good spot in the episode, I'm going to give that to you, because I've seen what you've done with that arena, and I told you, you're going to maybe take down the dating apps out there and the dating sites, because people are going to find a collaboration of people that are they're looking for jobs. They have different or similar interests, and it's just it's crazy.
Sorry, I had one of my HR leaders go slow at the end of a presentation and say, I just have an observation that I'd like to use this as a dating app. If I could put myself in the center and I could put the criteria in, here's my location, here are the skills that I'm looking for. And, I think I want to make sure that I shout to the companies as well, because we're getting close to 200 scouts, we call them, that we've had into our system. I think you joined one of these presentations. And it's been fascinating to see how we'll partner with the companies so that they can take jobs. Job posting is a very old concept to me, 300 years old. And the idea of putting an announcement out in the marketplace and having random people come and apply and having to sort through the hundreds of people that apply. I'm trying to change this to create a job signal in the arena and position your company and the job you have open against the top performing candidates in our system, and to switch the paradigm around. So you're actually building a slate of people that are a good match for your role and also are expressing interest, to kind of be a hybrid between the classic direct source recruiting firm and the old style job board that's basically falling away very quickly.
Right. How long have you had that idea about this new concept?
I started working on it. I was a ChatGPT user in 2023. At the beginning of 2024, I went to Phoenix, Arizona. I rode in someone else's car. It was a Turo. I stayed in somebody else's house. It was obviously an Airbnb. Someone else did my grocery shopping for my team while we were at the conference. And I came back and spent about 2 weeks, audited all the competitor firms that I saw in the space. And generally speaking, people were still working off the original patents from 30 years ago. And I felt like there hadn't been enough change in the marketplace. Lots of bolt-ons, lots of new features in the HR stack. But the idea of actually turning the sweatshirt inside out or upside down, tie that in, I think is very exciting for me to think about. Okay, the resume is so tired. It's exhausted. It's a pile of keywords and performance statements. What we can do better than that. And the seeker players deserve more because there's so much talent here that just gets thrown in the waste bin. And how do we kind of bring these people to light? And I think on the employer side, this idea of creating the signal is so important. So I've had this idea forming. One copy, always a distribution, easy to change, has been a dream of mine for 30 years. And the idea that right now you apply for a job, your resume digitally goes off and sits in some bin somewhere at a company, like it's gone. You've now gotten married, you moved to another city, you've had 2 kids, you have moved jobs 4 different times, and that old resume is still sitting out there as exhaust. The same thing's true of jobs. You post a job out in the marketplace, 10 different companies scrape that job from wherever you put it. It goes off to other sites. It's gone from your control, gets scraped again. Somebody finds it as a new job 5 months from now, is so excited to apply to your company, and then applies. And then as someone who's a recruiter or a TA on a role, you're like, I filled this role 6 months ago. What is this person doing? And it really has nothing to do with the seeker, right? I was talking to a seeker yesterday, 2 days ago, had applied for 900 jobs. Right. And like 300 of the jobs had gotten turned down. 300 of the jobs had not responded at all. And some of the jobs had actually said that they're waiting in the process. Only like 17 of those jobs had turned into some form of interview. And one of those interviews is with a bot. It's with a robot. I'm gonna bring 2 stories together because another applicant that was applying is all set. 200 of applications, finally gets an interview, and it's with a robot. So, it's with an agent, and basically breaks down crying. Like, I thought I was going to talk to a human being, and I think somehow we've lost the human in the middle. And a big thing about our arena is the agentic systems run underneath. They're transparent. You know exactly how they work. Whatever you build is your signal, is what we're going to match against. And you as a human have the ability to adjust everything either by voice or by doing it the old-fashioned way. You can click into the location area and say, okay, I want to change from in-house to hybrid. I want to see what happens to the applicant pool. And you've watched this happen. Then the arena actually goes and searches and finds with your new criteria. I'm really excited to bring this out to the market, and we'll be bringing it out right about the end of this year.
Yeah. One final question, Jeff, and this is more personal insight to your last 30, 40 years of work. What's the most rewarding part personally in building the platforms that you've been connected to, and the marketing strategies and the business entrepreneurial spirit you have? What's the most rewarding part of all that so far?
It's funny. I got interviewed. It's got to be 20 years ago. And I said, the thing I'm the most excited about is watching the people around me find their big year and get success. And I can't wait to see what they're going to be doing 20 years from now. And one of the really exciting things for me is now the people that worked at Monster are everywhere. And they all have an experience from working in our culture and it was a culture that was people forward. And I think almost to a T, they would say the monster job was the best job I ever had. And I'm going to generalize a little bit, but there's enough comments like this. It's funny. I'm just organizing 2 reunions, one in London and one here in Boston, and they're going to happen in November. And what I can't wait to do is just to celebrate the lives of and enjoy the talent and how these people have grown, really personally and professionally. And I can't wait to give them all a hug. And so that's my biggest single impact. Never really been about the money for me. I love recruiting. I love the talent business. And if that doesn't come across from me, I'm like not doing my job. And Boomband is the next chapter for me. I'm actually really excited about the inside out, upside down. And I can't wait to introduce it to the world.
Yeah. No, I've really enjoyed talking to you, Jeff. I enjoy what you're doing on LinkedIn and asking people for feedback, even about your mascot. If you haven't seen some of Jeff's posts, he's trying to create a mascot just like he did with Monster. So cannot wait to see what you finally end up with for that mascot, if it's going to be something completely different than what you've come up with so far. But really appreciate your time today, Jeff. I cannot wait to see where Boomband goes. I'm sure we'll be in there. I'll be in there playing around with it, finding a job in the future, and just trying to be there along the way with everybody on your team. So really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'm looking forward to kind of getting this out there, and we'll talk to everybody.
All right. Well, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. And remember, champions adjust, y'all. That is what I live by. So adjust as you can, be a champion. And we have a new live episode next Monday with a brand new guest. Some of you may have heard of him before. He's part of the Work Defined community. So, Jeff, thanks again. Have a great day, bud, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, David. Have people go to boomband.com and they can sign up for our Backstage Pass. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, David.
Yes. See ya.